So Matrimonial Homes Bill, what's the objective of the legislation? You know, what do you think the legislature is trying to achieve here? Do you think that there is an interference with rights? Do you think that what the state is doing here is interfering with rights? You know, and again, by all means, come in, please do. But you don't have to.
I don't really think it's really infringing on anyone's rights, but uh, the legislature's purpose for it is just to make sure that the partner that does have to stay home look after the kids, whether be it the husband or the wife, they aren't put at a disadvantage should the two of them break it off.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't get your name there. Sorry, who was that?
Jersey.
Oh, Jersey. Thank you. Okay, Jersey. You don't see an interference with rights. What you see, I think you've articulated what the objective is, as you see it, of the legislation, right? I'm gathering from you that you think this was a good legislative initiative.
Yeah, I'm for it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay. And it's concerned with, all right, it has in mind, for instance, that the woman typically is perhaps the wrong phrase now, but probably statistically then the right phrase. But in any case, in many instances, the woman would be working in the home and would therefore, in the event of marital breakdown, would be potentially in a pretty bad situation financially if she didn't have joint ownership in the home, right? Is that it, Jersey? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, though, you don't see there being an interference with rights. No, not for you.
Not really. I don't see any section where it could impede even like on the husband's rights, simply because it doesn't really necessarily add anything to it. Uh, they're already married, so they have shared shared custody of kids, and they have shared resources.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else
Um,
agree? Disagree?
how can both parties, if both parties agree to that only one party should have the house, how do they decide on who should get the house when both parties want the house? And if you have one party that actually purchased the house and the other party got the house, then isn't that an infringement on the person who purchased the house in the first place? And then
Right.
the party that gets the house would have the custody, or I'd assume the custody of the children, because then the children would go in that house. So then the rights to the custody of the child is taken away from the other party that doesn't get the house. Is that the
I don't know
infringement?
about the latter part, Ruan.
Okay.
Now we're getting into kind of family law and custody.
Yeah.
And I know that's
Okay.
entirely relevant, but first of all, I don't have expertise in that area.
Okay.
But also, I guess, getting away from the constitutional dimension. I doubt, to be honest, now that the second part of your point is quite the case. I doubt.
Okay.
But I do, I'm following your train of thought, but I doubt it. But the first point you make, I think, is pretty important in that essentially what you're saying is there's an interference with property rights here. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Because like, how do you, if both want the house, how do you and they both acknowledge that only one should have it, because they can't, it's just dysfunctional in when they are in the same house together. How can they decide on who gets it when they're making a balance? However, how can there be balance when one probably purchased it and the other one didn't,
or maybe inherited it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
You know, right. Okay, so do you think this is, I'm getting from you then, Ruan, that you're not so keen on this legislation. You feel it's
it's
enough interference with rights.
Because, like, let's just say the mother had it inherited from her family from generations, and then her father, and then the husband wanted to have the house because he might have restored it, or maybe paid some extensions. You know, you never know. There's so many problems with it.
Of course. Right. Well, okay. I'm following all of that. So what I'm taking from that then really is that I'd love to know if there were other views on this. Please do come in. if you would be minded to do so. But in any case, what I'm getting from that is a sense. I can't say that this is a sense that the whole class shares because I just don't know. But that there's a goal here. There's a legitimate goal, I think. I mean, I'm not so sure Ruan thinks there's a legitimate goal, but I think there's a legitimate goal. And I think that Jersey thinks there's a legitimate goal. Others, I don't know. But a legitimate goal of, securing the protection of both partners in a marital situation, guarding against, vulnerability in the event of marital breakdown, and so on, and promoting the notion of like shared like, partnership in marriage, and counteracting excessive power being vested in one person over the other, all those kinds of things. I think that's a legitimate goal in a democratic society. Right. I also think, this here I'm agreeing with Ruan, that there's an interference prima facie with rights, probably property rights, but we're more interested here now in family rights. Now, I'm not so sure on the latter part if there is an interference with family rights. But I guess if you read the Irish Constitution and think of the Constitution in context, this seems to be a case of the state making a decision with respect to ownership of homes for families, where rather than families themselves making decisions with respect to ownership of family homes. And insofar as that's the case, it seems to be in a certain tension with Article 41, Section 1, right? Which gives the family. Now, I mean, the family is a murky concept, really. We all maybe have in mind this very conventional family. But like, who's making this decision really is what I'm trying to get at. And of course, that depends on the individuals, on the marriage, on the family. So many families are so different, of course. But in any case, Article 41, Section 1, subsection 2 refers to the authority of the family. And it doesn't just casually refer to the authority of the family. It seems to really think like this is a big thing. The state shouldn't, the family in its constitutional authority is indispensable to the welfare of the nation, the state, all that stuff. And the family comes prior to the state and is antecedent to the state and all that. And here's the state saying, well, look, guys, there's an automatic presumption here that the family home is jointly owned, no matter how it came into, no matter what was the case before. So prima facie. Right. So in any case, I don't know. Is a legitimate goal? I think so. Is there interference with rights? I think so. Is it an arbitrary interference with rights? I don't think so. I think it's justifiable. I think it's, in other words, if I was on the court, even in the context of interpreting Article 41, Section 1, I would probably be very disinclined to make a finding of invalidity. You're probably wondering, well, what the hell did they decide? They decided to strike down the law. They found it unconstitutional. I come back to, let me just bear with me, actually. I might as well, while we're talking about it now, I might as well try and read for you a little quote from, or a little excerpt from the judgment, if I can find it. Yeah. The court said on an Article 20, the Supreme Court recognizes that, quote, the advantages of encouraging joint ownership in family homes was conducive to the dignity, reassurance, and independence of each of the spouses and to the partnership concept of marriage, which is fundamental to it. So in other words, the Supreme Court is saying, we recognize a legitimate objective here. In fact, they're not saying it's merely legitimate. They're saying this is a laudable legislative goal. This is something that a democratic state would want to do to protect independence of individuals, etc. Okay, but then, so from the point of the Heaney and Ireland proportionality test, seeing as we're talking about that this week, or you guys are in your tutorials, this seems to suggest there's a big objective here, and it's not just legitimate, it's laudable. So that seems to kind of, how on earth is the court going to find this a disproportionate interference with rights? Anyway, having regard, this is quoting from the judgment, having regard to the extreme importance of the family, of the authority of the family, as acknowledged in Article 41, and to the acceptance in that article of the fact that the rights which attach to the family, including its right to make decisions within its authority, are inalienable and imprescriptible and antecedent and superior to all positive law, the court is satisfied that such provisions do not constitute a reasonably proportionate intervention by the state with the rights of the family and constitute a failure by the state to protect the authority of the family. By the way, let's not forget the provisions that allowed for families to override this assumption if, quote, the family, or in inverted commas, the family, if the family wanted to. Now, my concern there would be, or what I'm trying to get at by putting it in inverted commas, is that wouldn't it likely be the powerful figure within the family who would make such a decision? You would have thought. Or wouldn't that be the concern in some instances? But in any case, despite the fact that there was provision allowing for families to override, this was struck down as invalid. So I think Lucianne Buckley, in her judgment for the Feminist Judgments Project, I mentioned that volume quite a bit in class, and this is one of the Supreme Court judgments of the several that is rewritten recently by a feminist scholar, in this case Lucianne Buckley in Galway, who imagines herself being a judge on the court and writes what she would have written in the circumstances. So it's an interesting one. She talks about, for instance, like, the dynamics, power dynamics within families. That's not to say that all men lord it over their wives, of course not, but that, potentially some do, or perhaps some women lord it over their husbands, as Ruan, I think, gestured at earlier on, and that this is what is the concern of the legislation. Also, the notion that in the early days of a marriage, like, there's natural optimism in the air, there's kind of waving through of legal stuff, whereas 20 years down the tracks or 10 years down the tracks, things can be very, very different. And so this is the state trying to guard against and protect individuals who might be vulnerable, whereas the court found it unconstitutional. So I think we'll just leave that one there. And I'm going to just, okay.